We made this.
This week we are moving away from movies and TV, and we're going into the wonderful world of music. Colin is part of the We Dig Music podcast. Hello, Colin. How are you?
Hi, Kurt. Not bad. Yeah, cheers for having me on.
Just as a general overview, just give us an idea of what We Dig Music does and how long you've been going for.
Sure. Yeah, we've been going. It'll be 2 years in June this year. Basically what we do is we go through the alphabet, and for each letter of the alphabet we pick a well-known band and a less well-known band. So completely genres all over the place. So for example, the most recent episode was Opeth, who are a sort of Swedish prog metal band, and Oasis, who are very much not.
Yeah, they're a slightly different take, aren't
Yeah.
they? A bit more, let me think, British.
Yes, just a little bit. Basically, it's me and two of my best friends. We're all complete music obsessives. We cross over with that we're into, but there's a lot of stuff that we are all very different in what we dig, and we just basically jabber on about it and swear far too much, basically.
Well, that's the absolute pleasure of listening to it, actually. I do enjoy that, and I particularly, in the episodes I've heard of, I particularly love Ian's his reaction to certain bands and certain things. He's very non-committal in certain things.
Yes. Some of Tracey's choices, particularly when they're more sort of folky, indie, Scottish folk indie pop stuff, that Tracey chooses a lot of it.
He may be a little bit not too keen on Oasis, should we say?
There's more C words in this episode than usual, and there's usually a fair few.
And we're going to be talking about Liam Gallagher eventually as well, just before the end of the podcast, because he's tweeted out something today, which we'll talk about very briefly. But before we do that, we need to get into a bit of background on yourself, Colin. So, from my research and speaking to you before we came on air, you obviously have a real love of music and a real drive to listen to many different genres and many different types of bands. And you're in the musician business yourself as well, aren't you? You're a musician yourself. What do you do outside of the podcast? What sort of thing have you done in the past? How did you start getting into music? Where did the real oomph come from? And what are you doing now as part of being a musician?
I've always been massively into music. I grew up in a pretty musical household. My dad's a guitarist and singer. He's a big music fan, so I've always grown up, like, my earliest memories are all like listening to my dad's records and stuff like that. And then been obsessed with music since as long as I can remember. Started playing guitar and singing in bands when I was sort of about 13, 14ish properly. And I've been doing it ever since. So I now do a lot of sort of solo acoustic covers gigs and that kind of thing. Right, just mostly playing pubs and that sort of thing. Yeah. Trying to fend off the people asking for Oasis songs. But I mean, me and Tracey, who I do the podcast with, are both in a sort of noisy, folky indie pop band called Driven Like the Snow, which is kind of like Nick Cave and the Bad Seeds meets Hope of the States sort of thing. Although we've not actually played many gigs recently. We're on a sort of indefinite hiatus, but right. We will be back at some point. I'm from Tamworth originally, and there's a really sort of strong music scene there, or there used to be. I don't think there is so much anymore, but that's where I know Ian from, who's our other co-host, who's I've been best mates with for 20 years now, since I had answered an advert in the local paper for a rock gig called Thrash for Cash, which he was organising, like a charity gig with loads of rock and metal bands.
Just on a side note, we've recently up here had a bit of a news story where there was a similar thing with saying, like, there was a band, well-known band around this area that do a lot of charity gigs, and that's all they ever do.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, their gear burnt down. They were actually in a rehearsal room, and their gear burnt down, so that was a bit of a disaster, really. So so I think they're trying to recover from that, but I'm sure that hopefully they'll get back on their feet. You mentioned there about the kind of the pub scene, and then in Tamworth, maybe that's changed a bit, and where you are now. I've noticed, I mean, from my area is very weak in the music scene in a lot of ways, from covers right through to sort of your university stuff. The university stuff's starting to pick up a bit now. I mean, I'm not involved in that scene anymore, so I'm not too au fait with that. But around my area, it has to be the West Coast, and that's the West Coast of Cumbria. Yeah. Which I mentioned to you before during your podcast your last one with Oasis and the Swedish band there. You mentioned It Bites, and Francis Dunnery was the guitar player from It Bites, and he was from the West Coast, from where I am, and the music scene down there is really big, and it's and it has waned a little bit over the last few years, but you can always go down there, you can play covers, you can do pub gigs, you can do acoustic sets, and it always goes down well. How are you finding that around your area? Are you seeing that there's been a change? I'm seeing that you mentioned about being an acoustic guitar player and playing scenes like that. That seems to be the main focus at the moment. Is that what you're seeing down your bit?
I mean, I'm doing quite well with it at the moment. I managed to, over the last couple of years, managed to get 2 agents who have got me a lot of gigs. Which has been really good. But it's a completely separate, different thing to the gigs where you play an original material. Absolutely. There is. I live in Birmingham now, and there are some really, really good stuff around. I'm just completely out of it. I'll go and watch my mates play, but I've not played a gig doing original material sort of thing for quite a while. I'll stick the odd 1 or 2 songs in my other sets, but Birmingham, there is a really good scene. We've got some really good venues. There's a band called You Dirty Blue who are absolutely amazing, who are doing pretty well. They've like supported Wolf Alice and people like that. So there are people still doing it. It's just, I think it's as I've got older. I'm a dad now. yeah. I'd like to get back into it at some point, but it's finding the time. And to be honest, these days there's other stuff that's just as fun. And I think the podcasting is sort of, I've put my focus more into that these days than the songwriting kind of thing that I used to do.
Yeah, I mean, one of the reasons why I ask is, there's definitely a difference between being a function band. I play in a function band and an acoustic act. You get a lot of sort of continental style bars now, just doing acoustic acts and doing covers, kind of Ed Sheeran style. And one of the reasons why I was asking that question was because there seems to be, just in general pop, I'm just talking like the UK top 40 kind of thing, that there isn't really a movement as such. When you go back to, even like the Oasis days, and you've got that movement of people that are moving into that. You had Franz Ferdinand and editors around that sort of era as well, and even before that, had various different scenes that were pushing it. Like the ska stuff and whatever. There just seems to be an absence of bands that are hitting the charts right now. Really,
I think there will be again, but I don't think that we'll be the ones that see it coming. It's going to be the kids who are 16, 17, 18 now that there's probably stuff that I can't even comprehend what kind of sounds they're making, and it'll probably all be over Twitch rather than doing their own gigs and stuff.
Just absolutely absent to the rest of the world and just doing it within their own social media. Yeah, that's probably the way you're going. It's probably happening right now. We just don't know.
Quite possibly. I'm 37. I'm completely out of that world.
Well, I'm 2 years older, so I'm literally just turned 39. So yes, we are slightly over there, I think. Just from a point of view of general music then, and the stuff that you listen to and the stuff that you're really into, what does your day or what does your week look like with regards to music? How much do you listen to? How do you listen to albums? Do you listen to them streaming? Just how does your week look when you look and listen to music?
Okay, well, it depends on how close we are to recording the podcast. Because when we've got a recording coming up, I will ration myself to only listen to the 4 or 6 bands that we're recording episodes about that week. Yeah. And I'll sort of aim everything towards that, and do sort of spin-off bands, side projects, that kind of thing, podcasts about those bands. But if we've recently, this year, we've cut down the podcast to once a month rather than once every 2 weeks. And part of that was so that I could have more time to listen to what I wanted. I do quite a lot of listening to stuff on Spotify and on YouTube. That seems to be my main way of like discovering new music at the moment.
Right, yeah.
And there's some brilliant stuff out. There's a new song by a band called Charlie Bliss, who are sort of American female-fronted indie pop kind of thing that are fantastic. I like really diverse, different types of music, which I suppose is why we choose so many different things. And it just depends what I'm feeling like that day. I mean, I work in an office, and I'm on the phone most of the day, so I can't listen to music while I'm at work. On my way to work, in my lunch break, on my way home from work, I've either got podcasts or music on constantly.
Right. Yeah, that sounds familiar. I'm listening to a podcast or an album.
I reckon it's probably these days, it's probably 70% podcasts, and maybe 30% music. A lot of those podcasts are about music, so that then sort of leads me on to an artist I'm not familiar with, and that'll then lead me on to listening to a lot of their stuff.
Yeah, and going down the rabbit hole.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Like the Phoebe Bridgers album I've been listening to loads since it was on Pick-a-Disc.
Yeah, it's that one's really good, that episode. I've only heard about half of it, but
Well, they almost got a scoop on that. I listened to it quite late. Most of those episodes I've listened to the day they've come out. I listened to that one about a week later, and there's a bit where Phoebe Bridgers is talking. There's one of her songs is basically about the way she was treated by Ryan Adams. And later that day, the news came out about the fact that there were loads of women who were basically taking legal action about the sexual misconduct. And Phoebe Bridgers was one of them. And it was like, I heard about this on Matt's podcast this morning. Bloody hell.
Yeah, that's not bad going for his 4th or 5th episode, is it? If you had, this is just an open question for you. Okay, this is just the final one before we actually do start to talk about your podcast in more detail. But if you had a musical time period, apart from where you're living right now, to live in, when would it be and why?
I've got a ridiculously nerdy answer for this one. So there's a music journalist called David Hepworth who has this theory that 1971 is the greatest year for pop music ever. Because of the amount of like classic albums released that year. Tracey, who I do the podcast with, is convinced that 1991 is the best year for music ever. So I decided to do a bit of an experiment, and the last couple of weeks I've been going through Wikipedia lists of albums released in each year and making a list for every single year since 1965 of how many albums came out that year that I like. And 1996 appears to be winning at the moment. I've still got a few years to go through. I've got up to 2002 at the moment, but I can't see another year beating it. So the 90s appears to be the best, which surprised me. But yeah, there was so many great albums. 1996 I was 14, so you've got loads of, I was listening to stuff like Smashing Pumpkins and, Nirvana, that kind of thing, Green Day. And it's that kind of sort of American rock sound is really what I was. But then you've also got, stuff like Portishead and Massive Attack were releasing brilliant stuff around then.
Yeah.
Generally, it's the 90s. There was a lot of horrible stuff, but there was some really good stuff coming out at the same time.
Did you see I think it was on Sky News last couple of days, I think it was, that there was someone spray painting the Mezzanine album cover onto like a canvas with the album made from DNA.
Right, I didn't see it on the news, but I know they released. Yeah, so they did a reissue of the Mezzanine album where it was reissued as a spray can. And I'm not quite sure the science of this, but the DNA of the album was put into the paint. Now, I don't think albums have deoxyribose nucleic acid in them. So I'm not entirely sure. I think it might be bollocks.
Well, it's supposedly $50,000 worth of bollocks.
Right, okay.
Because they had scientists that were saying how they were reconstituting the DNA to change, from all the ACCT and everything like that into it and make the ones and zeros that would make the album.
Yeah.
And then they were starting to talk about the way that would survive. Probably only, I can't remember exactly because I wasn't really watching it that much, to be honest. But I think it was a year, and then they've now designed something which will solidify it in kind of like a glass.
Okay.
So that you could store it in that, and the whole idea is that DNA will become a storage system eventually. That once it's not like a $50,000 worth.
Well, it makes sense because you can store stuff in binary, and a DNA code has got 4 different things in it, so it should be a higher def use of memory basically than binary.
Well, that was an angle I wasn't looking at coming down today. Anyway, that's good. That's good. Current news affairs. This is something I maybe go into next.
Yes.
Maybe I should start talking about Brexit. Maybe not. Right. Okay. So your podcast is called We Dig Music.
It is.
Who came up with that? How did that come about?
That was me.
That was you.
Yeah, I had the idea for it and basically sent Ian and Tracey a message because I know that they're 2 of my best friends and I talk about music with them all the time, and I thought, why don't we just record it? Structure it slightly more. And I'd been into podcasts for a couple of years already when I decided that we were going to start recording it. I'd appeared as a guest on a couple. There used to be a magazine called The Word that was really, really good, and the magazine sort of went bust, but there was quite a good community on the forum, and the people on the web forum started running their own podcast, and I appeared on a couple of episodes of that. I also recorded an episode of my friend Mike Dryborough, who's a stand-up comedian, does a podcast called Mike's Mixtapes, which is actually offline at the moment, which is really annoying. But he recorded an episode with me about 2 and a bit years ago, which he's kind of got Guns N' Roses level of productivity, because he's only put out about 6 episodes, I think, in the last couple of years. Basically, he started recording it and then his wife had a baby immediately, pretty much straight afterwards, and he's not had the time since. But I kind of got the bug from doing that, and also from listening to other podcasts. There were some that inspired me in a good way, and others that I was listening to. There's one, I'm not going to give it its proper name, but a alternative title could be The Good Records. But there's a podcast that I used to subscribe to and realised that it just made me angry with the amount of things that they were getting wrong.
Oh, right, okay.
And it just made me think, well, I could do my own one, then I could get things wrong and people could get angry at me.
That's fair enough.
Because there's almost certainly massive inaccuracies in ours, because we're just music fans. We're not, I wouldn't say we're experts, I'd say we're nerds. And we put a lot into the research, but we're going to make mistakes, obviously.
Yeah. Well, one of my next questions was going to be that the style that you've got is fairly free flowing, and you mentioned about being best friends, and that definitely comes across the airways when you listen back to your podcast, because they are natural. It feels like you are sitting in a pub and just generally talking. Yeah. I can see there's a clear thread there, though, that you do your research, because of the way that sometimes it does end up, even though it is quite, it goes off at tangents, but it always does come back, and I do appreciate the way that that's done, because you've got a clear structure there, but the threads are allowed to go wherever they go, really, which is really good. How do you record the podcasts themselves? How does that come about? How do you organise that and get together to record?
Okay, so the organisation we've got planned ahead what we're going to do for when we first had the idea. We each wrote a list throughout the alphabet, each of a well-known band and a less well-known band. So we'd essentially got 3 years worth of 3 goes through the alphabet,
right?
Worth of bands. So we've got like over 3 years planned. Now that we've gone to once a month, it's lengthened the amount of time we've got. So we're really far ahead with what bands we've planned to do. We work out what we're doing next. We do a Spotify playlist for each of us to listen to. So whoever's chosen the band, or whoever's got the sort of biggest stake or knows that band's music particularly, or make the playlist. Sometimes we'll have a collaborative one, like we've got an REM episode coming up where we're all pretty much equal. With how much we like them, so
I hope Lotus is on that.
It's not actually, but we're definitely. I've listened to every single REM album. Tracey has. Ian doesn't do much research, but he's more of a fan of later REM than earlier REM, so almost certainly. I think we're all going to have listened to Up. Because it's great.
It is. I love. I mean, don't get me wrong. I love Monster and Automatic for the People, but I really like Up for it. I think it's probably the same. And when did Up must have come out around 1996? Strangely enough, somewhere around there, was it?
Which one? Up? Up was later than that. I think it was about 98.
Yeah, I like the change. I like obviously I'm not going to go into too much detail there, but I do like the way that the change, because I think that was when the other band member left, wasn't it?
Yes, it was. It was when their drummer had an aneurysm.
Yes.
Had to retire from playing, and it's really similar, because it was a similar sort of time to Smashing Pumpkins released their Adore album, which was their album where they completely changed their sound. Their drummer was fired because him and their keyboard player had gone out and done loads of heroin, and the keyboard player had died.
Right.
So they sacked him overnight, and then did the next album with loads more sort of drum machines, and it was a much quieter album. And they're almost like sort of companion albums to each other, even though they're not related. But it was a similar sort of time, and it was a similar sort of change in sound.
So going back.
So tangents, this is what we do.
Oh, exactly. when we're talking music, I have to. It's one of those things. This one's going to be slightly different from a normal podcast, I think. So you've listened to the album. You've got your playlist. What happens after you've done your playlist and listened through the albums?
So the three of us do our research in completely different ways and quantities. Trace, basically, I start straight away. In fact, I do some research before we've even recorded the previous lot. I'll start planning ahead, that far ahead. Tracey starts about probably 2 weeks before usually, and Ian normally does it on the morning of recording.
That's great.
And I think it works really well with the sort of dynamic between the three of us, because Tracey tends to write a lot of notes and then ends up not using a lot of them. I'll write, she'll turn up with like 4 pages of typed up immaculate notes. I've got a little scrap of paper with little almost shorthand one word note type things, and then Ian has no notes at all and just sort of free flows and goes with it. Ian's a lot more with some of the bands that he doesn't know as well. He's a bit more of, this is my opinion on this, rather than this is some things about the band. And it's great. It makes it really fun, particularly when there's a band that he absolutely hates. But yeah, so we all research it in completely different ways. Then we normally record sort of 2 or 3 episodes at a time. So we go round to Ian's flat, and I set up all the recording stuff. I'm the one that owns all the recording gear. Ian's got a bit. Ian owns some pop shields and the headphone amp, so it's not just me. But yeah, I basically do the recording, and the way we actually record it has evolved a lot since we started. The first one, we had I used one of those Zoom H2 handy recorder thingies, which has got the built-in microphone. So the first episode that we recorded, it was just recorded on that. We just put that on a table, And then for volume mixing, we just had Tracey sitting on a cushion on the floor right next to it, and me and Ian sitting the other side of the room because we've got much louder, deeper voices.
Okay.
And you can tell when you listen to that episode. It's a good episode because it's like getting... it's sort of introducing us all, but there is a couple of bits where the audio isn't amazing. So we then learnt from that, and the next time decided to do it with 3 separate microphones. So I used a couple of my mics and then borrowed an SM58 from someone else. So that was all just normal SM58 vocal mics.
Was that through? Did you do that through like a mixing desk?
Yeah, basically I used half of my PA setup without the power. I just plugged 3 mics into a desk, and then from the desk ran the desk into the Zoom. So I used the Zoom for the first year and a half as the actual recorder.
Yeah.
It's just after the first one we'd got a lot more control through the desk.
Yeah.
We then got some better mics later on. Well, borrowed them off me dad. So yeah, we used some sort of condenser mics off my dad. I've now bought a condenser mic. The other 2 are going to be getting theirs soon. Ian's actually getting married in a couple of weeks, so he can't spend any money until after that.
Yeah.
But
that's fair enough, isn't it?
But yeah, I've just got a Tascam TM80, which is, they're only about 60 quid, but it's a pretty good condenser mic. It's what I'm using now. And I've also I got myself a new laptop just around about Christmas, and a Behringer audio interface. So we're actually finally, as of the last few episodes, not all recording onto one track. So we're now multi-tracking it, so I can mix the different volumes, and mute bits if somebody laughs far too loudly and stuff like that. Because that's when it tends to clip.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so at least you've got more control. Even people laughing, you can just bring them down in the mix, can't you? So
yeah.
Which was one of my next questions, actually, and we will talk about a certain program very shortly, which actually has delayed our recording of the podcast from both sides, strangely enough.
Yes.
So that seems to have timed itself perfectly. You recorded like that. So now that you're doing it on multi-track using that Behringer, what sort of program are you actually using to record the DAW program that you're using?
Okay, so originally I was doing all the editing in Audacity, but I've just recently, when I got the new laptop and have a bit more processing power, I've started using Reaper, and it is absolutely fantastic. I was totally daunted by it for the first couple of weeks. In fact, so we recorded the 3 most recent episodes, we recorded straight into Reaper. But then the first one of those, I chickened out and edited it in Audacity.
Right.
But then learnt what I was doing, and as I was picking up more and more tricks with it, it's such a fantastic program. I used to get problems in Audacity with it crashing at least 2 or 3 times while editing each episode. I was doing it on a really old, crappy little netbook, which was massively over full. It was basically steam powered, it used to be that I'd drag a file into it because I always make sure we've got music throughout. So we put the bands that we're talking about as background music, sort of like low in the mix, but so people can hear who we're actually discussing at the time. There's a little quirk on Audacity, or it used to have on the laptop I was using, where if I forgot to stop it and then dragged a file into it, it completely crashed the system. And I had to shut everything down, start again, and go back about 4 steps and start again. With Reaper, the files are all linked rather than actually in there. So you put your mouse over your WAV file in there, and you can drag the end of it from either the start or the end of the file, and just shorten it and edit it that way. But if you've gone too far, you just drag it back and the file's still there. It's completely non-destructive editing, and you can put fades in by dragging it slightly higher up, and it's just like, I mean, this is probably really obvious stuff to loads of people that have been using decent DAW systems for years, but I'm quite new to it because I've been using ramshackle, cobbled together gear, and it is an absolute revelation. I'm absolutely loving it.
Good. No, well, it's definitely something that I need to consider. But I'm still in the Audacity mode. I do have access to some DAW files, and I have done in the past, and it is a nice way of editing. But when it's a two-person podcast, the way that I do it, it's okay doing it the way that I did. Having said that, I have thought about going down a different route, and as of a couple of weeks back, I downloaded something called Voicemeeter Banana.
Yeah.
So we're going to talk about this purely because it's very topical, because both yourself and me, we've had a few issues with it. Now, I'll start with mine, which happened to me. I had a couple of podcasts that I recorded. Everything went swimmingly. It's perfect for what I want to do, because I've got a particular style of voice that I like to EQ it before, and also like to have what's called noise gating. So whenever I stop talking, it goes quiet and you can't hear any background noise, which in theory would mean editing would be a lot quicker, because you just stop talking, and when the other person's talking, you don't need to worry about any knocks or clicks or anything like that at all. And if you do, you can physically see it. So that was fine. Everything was running absolutely spot on. I even had both, say, we're talking as we speak right now, I would have that going into Audacity in the right ear and have me speaking in the left ear, and then I would mix it after the point, making it into a mono file. That was all working fine. The everything was, compression was working perfectly, the noise gate was working perfectly, and Audacity was accepting the file. It wasn't a problem. Now, for some reason, I was on a podcast with somebody last week, and it decided to start messing with my computer systems, and the person on the other end of the phone turned into a Dalek. That's the best way of describing it.
Was it a Doctor Who podcast?
It wasn't. I've done a Doctor Who podcast, but it wasn't. It wasn't. It was a Millennium podcast, so it wasn't even. So it might have been the Millennium Bug, but, and then from then on, things just went all haywire. There was different sound devices connecting to different areas. I was trying to talk to the guy on Skype. It wasn't going through to him. I couldn't hear him. He couldn't hear me. I had to reboot my PC, and it took about 15 minutes to solve what was going on. I basically went back to basics. What was your issue with Voicemeeter Banana?
Right, probably user error, I would imagine. It's a really daunting program. It's got there's so many thousands of different options on there, and I haven't got a bloody clue what I was doing with it. Basically, I've when we record the podcast, we record it with all three of us in a room at the same time. Yeah. So I've never recorded a podcast at my end on Skype before. The Word Magazine podcast that I used to record as a guest ages ago, I was just talking on Skype and they were recording it the other end. So it's not something I'd really looked into. But I was appearing on an episode of Pick a Disc with Matt, and I did a bit of research, and it was like, Voicemeeter Banana, read a couple of tutorials, and it seemed fairly straightforward. So I stupidly decided to try and set it all up an hour before I was due to record the podcast, and basically had a panic attack. I couldn't get it to recognise my brand new condenser mic that I'd bought that day. So I was absolutely gutted that I didn't get to use that. It wouldn't recognise my Behringer audio interface at all. I ended up, I just about managed to get it to work with my Bluetooth headset. Right. So I recorded it through there. Then thought, right, I'll give myself a bit more time and try and get it sorted before I record this one with you. Yeah. So again, left it till nearly the last minute, which is exactly what I planned not to do. Yeah. But gave myself a bit more time, and then I couldn't even get the Bluetooth headset to work. I finally managed to get it to recognise the Behringer and the microphone, but it wouldn't connect to Skype then. So in a last-ditch attempt after postponing recording this for a week, I sent Matt a message and asked him what he used to record his. And there's a program called MP3 Skype Recorder, which is what we're recording on now, I believe, both ends. Or that's your backup, isn't it?
Yes, yeah. I record on Audacity for my end of the recording. So I'm recording straight into the Audacity. It's plugged in, it recognises the microphone, and it records in stereo. And the MP3 Skype Recorder records both your end and my end. And it puts it, again, similar to, this is kind of the reason why I went the Voicemeeter Banana route, because it's similar that I was panning my vocal into the left and whoever's vocal in the right. So then when you put it into Audacity, you can center those, split the tracks up, and then edit from there. But it's a great program as a backup from that point of view. And as I say, if we both, like we're doing now, you're recording your end, I record my end. You send me that file, and then I edit both files, so then we're getting full bandwidth. You're not having to worry about Skype's recording, because Skype does throttle it quite a bit, and you're not getting the typical Skype sound as we're here, as I'm hearing you right now.
Yeah,
I would love to get more into it, and I think there's probably ways around it, and it worked fine for those 3 episodes I did. It was absolutely spot on. It was brilliant, but I can't give myself that much time to look into the intricacies of it. If it was going to work and it worked every single time and you turn it on and it works, then great. But because it was causing that Dalek-y sound, and it was in the middle of a podcast as well, we'd been going for about 20 minutes, and I was hoping that his end, it wasn't from his end, because he was saying something really, really important, and but luckily it was just what I was hearing coming back to me. So there was obviously a sound, from a speaker point of view, there was something not right with it. So, but I just don't have the time to look at that.
No, and if it goes while you're recording, I mean, if you've got to stop and start again, it's so difficult to get the flow back. How it was. We had I think it was the Jimi Hendrix episode that we recorded. We ran out of space on the recorder. Right, so it was a massive rookie error. I should have checked beforehand how much space we got, but we used to monitor it out through the headphone output on the recorder, so we knew as soon as it went, because all our headphones shut off. So we had to sort of delete some files off there. Luckily I'd got my laptop with me, so I could do that, to get it sort of fixed again, and then try and start approximately where we were. And it's one of the things I'm sort of quite proud of, is I managed to edit it, and I don't know where the join is now.
So when you just going into editing, actually, just as we're kind of into that zone now, we've kind of gone through what you do and the problems that we've had recently. Do you actually edit? Do you edit straight away? Do you just leave it for a couple of days? And when you do a final edit, is it something that you do consistently by going back and re-listening to it a few days down the line?
Yeah, I'll pretty much start the day after. I do it a lot in my lunch breaks at work. I just bring my laptop in and then just stick my headphones on at my desk in the office. And so, yes, the sort of main process that I use is I cut the basics of the episode down, so I get rid of the, rambling on before we're even starting the episode and stuff like that. And then once I've done that and got the main sort of meat of the episode, or where it needs to be, there's a program called Levelator. Basically, put your WAV file into Levelator, and it does various magical pixie things with compression and leveling the audio. So now I'm recording on 3 tracks. I do actually mix it before I do that anyway. There's limiters in there, there's compressors in there, but it's all an automatic preset kind of thing, and it brings it up to like broadcast level.
Right, yeah.
And as you can probably tell, I haven't got a bloody clue what it actually does, but it sounds great. So I do that first of all, then I do the actual proper edit. So we've got the intro bit that I stick on first, which is the same on every episode. Then I've got some little bits of background music that are the same on every episode. That was a abandoned solo album that I was working on years ago when my laptop died, and they're the bits that I managed to rescue.
Oh, God.
And then basically I listen through the entire thing and put the tracks that we're talking about at the time in there. And as I go along doing that, that's where I'll cut stuff like if there's a slightly too long pause, if there's bits where we had an episode we recorded just before Christmas where Tracey was really ill. She'd actually been off work for a week, and she was coughing throughout the entire thing. And I think it's the heaviest edit I've ever had to do, because I managed to. I think I only left about 4 or 5 coughs in there, but I worked out that I think I'd cut about 16 minutes of coughing overall out of the hour and a half-ish episodes. I don't very often cut much content. I try and keep as much of it intact in there. I think it's usually a valid conversation about what we have. There's a couple of times where I've had to cut it if somebody said something about somebody we know that they're going to hear it and they won't like it.
Right,
So,
yeah. Because you need it to be a pub conversation just to keep the flow, but obviously, you need to self-censor it.
Yeah,
so.
Although we've definitely left some things in there. If Courtney Love listened, she probably would sue us. Or no, she would sue Tracey. It was all Tracey, not me or Ian. I just want to get that on the record. From the Nirvana episode, yeah.
Date stamp the 18th of February at 20:57.
Indeed. So we try not to cut stuff out, and there's a lot of opinion in there. There is, there is stuff that if the bands listened, they probably wouldn't like occasionally. There was the angriest rant I have ever heard about KT Tunstall in one of the episodes from Tracey, which is hilarious because I've never known anybody get angry about KT Tunstall.
Oh, right, okay. I need to hunt that one out.
That is one of my favourite episodes. That's where we're talking about King Creosote, who's a sort of Scottish indie folk sort of singer.
Okay.
And Ian absolutely hated him.
So
you've got Ian being really, really, really disparaging, and then he was part of a sort of collective of musicians called the Fence Collective, which KT Tunstall was an early member of before she, according to Tracey, became a fucking turncoat and sold out from them.
Brilliant. I think I've heard him mention on some later ones King Creosote, so that's obviously a continuing conversation.
We have a fair few callbacks to various things like Optimus Bowie, which is Optimus Bowie, which is me mispronouncing David Bowie. I mispronounce things a lot.
Yeah, I do. I tend to think it's where you think it's the right terminology, or you know it in your head, but it comes out completely wrong.
There's even some words that I've said so long I'm the only person in the world that pronounces that thing where they store all the water, I pronounce as reservoir, which no one in the world pronounces it as that, but I've done it for 30 odd years now and I'm not going to stop.
That's fair enough. That's not a problem for me whatsoever. So that's good. No, I think that's probably part of the charm of it, isn't it? The fact that you've got those callbacks and you're speaking to you've got that continuing on conversation. It's not something that I could do because I've got a different person depending on who event I've got. But the fact that you're there every episode and you can do those callbacks is great. And I've listened to podcasts before where they have things where on TV shows where they're talking about their own mythology of a show, and they've made this story up, and it started way back when, but it's got nothing to do with that TV show. It's something they've made up, and and it's fantastic going through that and just hearing that kind of thing. So I think that's really good. Is there anything that you feel in at this moment in time, or something that you may want to do in the future to improve on what you've already done? Now, obviously, you've mentioned likes of Reaper, and that's improving what you've done. You looked at Voicemeeter Banana, and that was obviously not quite there for you. But is there anything that you are looking at further down the line that you're thinking I could maybe improve on?
You can always learn to be better at everything all the time. At the same time, I'm really happy with how things are sounding. Yeah. So, other than getting another couple of our own condenser mics, so I'm not still having to borrow stuff off my dad every time, and stopping him from recording occasionally, which we've done once or twice. He's gone into his studio and went, "Where's all the bloody mics gone?" And I've end up getting a phone call going, "Can you bring me mics back?"
Yeah.
So, other than having more of our own equipment, I don't think there's that much more that we want to do in the format of this particular podcast. There are other. I've got so many other ideas for podcasts, but this one's going to be going for a very long time, I hope.
Yeah.
Touch wood. We've got plans for, over 2 years worth. We've got planned out, and then after that, we when we've gone through the alphabet 3 times, we're going to scrap the alphabet, and then we're just going to choose
Greek letters.
It's good work. We might run out of bands very quickly. We're already having to skip letters. There is not a Q episode this series because we realised that none of us give a shit about Susie Quattro or Queensryche. The plan is, after we've gone through our original lists that we made, we're going to continue with just random. They don't have to be the same letter, so we'll have like a well-known band and a less well-known band that have no relation whatsoever, but we've picked them at random, so that we can carry on doing it as long as we're all enjoying it, basically, which we are at the moment. But me and Ian have got a new podcast that we've recorded a couple of episodes for already, which is called Free With This Month's Issue. And it's basically old free CDs from like Kerrang, Enemy, Q, Melody Maker, that sort of thing, where it's the two of us and a different guest each time, where we basically listen through the CD and pretty much rip it to pieces. So the best ones of those are going to be ones where there's a mixture of really good stuff and absolutely terrible stuff that has not aged well. And I suppose what I want to improve on really is sort of getting different guests to come and join us on that one.
Right.
I want to get a bit more ambitious and not chicken out of asking people. So we've got the 2 that we've recorded so far are 2 of our friends who we've known for 20 odd years. We've been in talks with there's a fairly cool stand-up comedian. I don't want to mention anything at the moment in case it doesn't come across, but we've mentioned it to him at a gig a while back. He was really enthusiastic about it, but then we've sort of tailed off a bit on that, and he's got a DVD that he's been working on that I've not wanted to get in the way of.
Right, yeah.
So I've not been sort of pestering him, and I'm sort of wondering whether I should have, because I think the more, if we can get some like higher profile guests on there, that might lead to more and more. My absolute perfect person that I would absolutely love to get on there, there's a comedian called Josie Long. She is about the same age as me and has talked quite at length in her stand-up shows and stuff about her listening to old free CDs from Kerrang and Enemy and stuff, so right. She'd be absolutely perfect for it. Plus she's hilarious and amazing, but she had a baby last year, and I think she's basically taken a year off, and then everything's going to be building up. Everyone's going to be asking her to do stuff when she's back doing stuff, and we're sort of nobodies at the moment, but she's sort of my absolute goal that I would absolutely love to get on there, and we want to try and get some musicians, but you kind of got like there's a sort of narrowish age range, because a lot of the up-and-coming bands that are around now that might be interested in doing it have grown up since these CDs have stopped really existing. And then you've got sort of older people, people in their sort of late 40s, probably, well, maybe even sort of mid-40s onwards, were too old for them at the time. So you've only got sort of like maybe a sort of 15-year age span of people to go for. But so sort of getting guests on there. We want to get some other podcast presenters. Basically, if anybody's interested in doing it, let us know.
Yeah, but by all means, get in touch, and I'm sure we can point them in the right direction to you. So that's definitely something to look forward to.
Now I've figured out the wondrousness of recording over Skype. Possibilities are endless.
The world's your oyster. The world is your oyster. One final thing, you did have two things actually. One, I wanted to ask you a question on. You've just done a Swedish rock band.
Opeth.
Opeth, yeah. And I wanted to ask you, because this came up in a conversation with a friend of mine a few weeks back. Have you seen the Swedish kind of version of We Are the World?
No.
I suggest that you go to YouTube once we finish this and YouTube Swedish, sort of charity song single. It is appalling.
Excellent.
It's fronted. I think it must be the brainchild of Joy Tempest.
Right.
And it is absolutely appalling. It's basically every 80s Swedish rock lead singer you can get your hands on, pretty much singing out of tune to a kind of We Are the World, or those big charity singles where they're trying to raise money, and it is atrocious.
Have you ever seen the Pulp video for Bad? They had a song on their This Is Hardcore album called Bad Cover Version. The video for that, they got loads of lookalike stars in their eyes type people to do the song as if it was a Band-Aid type video, and it is fantastic.
Right, okay, that's our homework, and we'll see you on Twitter when this episode airs. But yeah, I do suggest having a look at that Swedish band. I think it's a Give Help a Chance or something like that. So that's something to listen to. And your recent podcast also had Oasis on it. Now, today, Liam Gallagher has tweeted, and I just wanted to get your thoughts and opinions on this as part of a supplemental to your episode. Liam Gallagher, so it's the footage of me singing Live Forever at the One Love concert that's upset Team NG. Maybe it's a shame of the not so mighty little fella not showing up because he was too busy supping bubbles on a dinghy with What's Her Face, As You Were, LG. So that's something to consider. Did you see that tweet today?
I did. I saw that one, and I looked at it earlier, and then saw that was a follow-up tweet. His earlier one was, I've just been informed that I'll be sued by the not so mighty little fella and his goons at Ignition if I use any footage of me singing Oasis songs in As It Was, which I assume must be a film he's making.
Right.
Yeah. So Noel's suing Liam not for being a bellend, but for singing songs that, I mean, to be fair, Noel wrote them.
Yeah.
And to be also fair, Noel's the better one out of Oasis, because Liam is, well, we swore quite a lot describing him in our episode.
You did. Definitely suggest, if you haven't, then go through and listen to that aspect of it. And it's nice to get in listening to bands that you're not used to hearing as well. I think that's a really important part of your podcast.
Oh, brilliant.
How can people find the podcast and find you online?
Okay, so we've got the easiest way. We've got a website called wedigpodcasts.com, which has got all of the We Dig Music episodes, and it will have the new podcast free with this month's free with this month's issue on there as well. When I think we're going to put that out, probably it's going to be, I reckon April is going to be the first episode of that we'll release.
Okay.
It might be March, but round about that sort of time. But yeah, we're on Twitter at We Dig Music PCast, because at We Dig Music Podcast is too many letters for Twitter, and Facebook /We Dig Music PCast as well.
Well, thank you very much for coming on, Colin. It's much appreciated, and I will get you back on with hopefully Ian as well once that podcast gets up and running, and our stars will align again for us to talk about that. So it's fantastic. Okay, so in the meanwhile, again, thank you very much for coming on. It's very much appreciated, and that is my word of the day, because I say that all the time. And I just wanted to say to people, those people who've heard my 6 episodes or 7 episodes or whatever it is, then I apologise for saying that over and over again. But I am part of the We Made This Podcast network. It's been an absolute pleasure, and we will see you next time. Thank you very much for listening.
Cheers.
Bye for now.